All right, so welcome to Unit 2. I hope you had a chance to complete your influencing capabilities profile, but if you haven't, don't despair. You'll get a chance to do this after, and the cost of doing that, of course, is part of the program, so you're entitled to complete that. I've just come back from Malaysia, so I've sort of been out of communication a little bit over the last week. So I'm just hoping everybody had a chance to complete it, and if you didn't, for some reason from my end, I apologise, but you'll get a chance to do that. So if you haven't done it, then you'll get an opportunity to be able to understand how it all works today. And of course, if you have, this would be a debriefing session so that you can actually have your 12 to 14 page profile in front of you as we go through. All right, so let's get underway. So as you can see on the screen, we've got 4 characters, and they're all historically significant. I would imagine when you look at these characters on the screen, it'll engender some sort of emotion with you. In other words, you'll either love them or dislike them. You may it would certainly provoke some reaction, and the reason for that is that these 4 people, 3 of them who are dead and 1 that's still alive, were hugely influential in their own way. And in fact, they were, in some respects, changed the course of history. So at the top end, on the left-hand side, you've got Al Gore, who's the former Vice President of the United States of America. You've got Margaret Thatcher, who was the first female Prime Minister of Great Britain and reigned for 10 years. You've got Martin Luther King, who, of course, was a civil rights activist in the United States, who had an incredible speech, one of the great speeches of all time, in 1967, I Have a Dream. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that, if you've done your profile, if you click on the little icon, you'll get a chance to see Martin Luther King in action. In fact, if you click on the little icon in any of the 4 strategies of influence, what will happen is that you'll get a little bit of an icon, a little bit of a video clip of each of the 4. And finally, at the bottom, we have Mother Teresa, who, of course, has been anointed into sainthood recently by the Catholic Church for her work in the poor streets of Calcutta and other parts of the world. So these 4 people have been highly influential, and what's interesting about them all is that they've used a particular influencing strategy that I'm going to go through today. And so very much have they been wedded to a particular type of influencing strategy. But whether we love or hate these people, the truth of the matter is they've all been highly influential. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go through. I've tried to keep it sort of I've tried to keep the gender, well, I have kept the gender balance. I've tried to look at the left wing of politics and the right wing of politics. So I've done all I can to attempt to I guess, be politically correct, if I put it that way. By the way, if you've got questions, comments, statements, observations, whatever, you are most welcome, of course, in the question box to record those, and I'll stop at different points throughout the presentation to address those as we go. All right, so we'll use these 4 characters to illustrate the 4 influencing strategies, which will be very evident shortly. I guess the first thing that is important in any sort of presentation like this on influence is just to define what influence is, because I think a lot of people have very interesting ideas about influence. Some people might see it as manipulation, and others might see it as a normal part or course of what they do day to day. But here's a definition, and it's a definition from my book, The New Influencing Toolkit. Of course, there are many, many definitions about influence, but at least you need to know what my definition is of influence. So it's the power to make other people agree with your opinions and get them to do what you want willingly and ethically. So the key words, of course, are power, Yes, it is a form of power, but I mean a form of power in a very ethical way, not a form of manipulation power. And we're attempting to get people, that is the people we lead, to do things that we want them to do, but to do them in a willing and ethical way. In other words, they're doing it because they can see the sense in doing it, and also they're doing it because it is ethical. It's not underhanded, or it's transparent. People know what you're attempting to do. So it's very important we get that clear up front so that nobody gets this misapprehension that it's really about manipulation. It really isn't. It's much more than that. And so I think that's particularly important that we get that clear to start with. Okay, now the other point I'd make to you all is that really we are all in the business of influence, every single one of us. So this is important because whether you are at home with your family, whether you are at work or play, we are all every day consciously and subconsciously attempting to influence other people, getting people to think a certain way, getting people to do a certain thing, getting people to perhaps be persuaded by your point of view. We're all in that business. And I think it's very important, and that's why this is the second module in the Lunch and Learn series, because we are all in this business and we all should acknowledge that. So I just want to make those couple of points clear before we move on so that nobody's under any misapprehension, I should say, about why we're doing this. All right, now, when we're attempting to influence anybody about anything, there's basically three variables that are at work. And it's probably important for just to realize what those variables are. One of the variables at work is our preference or our preferred style and approach. Now, having completed the influencing capabilities profile, it will give you an indication of what your preferred style and approach is. We've all got a preferred style and approach. And what happens is that we tend to use that preferred style and approach too often. In other words, because we're convinced about it, we're assuming that others are convinced as well. For example, if you're very much a logical, rational person, that's how you'll try and influence people. You'll use facts and figures and structure and rationale to convince people that this is the way we need to go. Trouble is, some of the people that you lead are obviously influenced in a different way. And because of that, we have often frustrations because they're not on the same page as we are. So, of course, the second variable is the other person or persons. Now, if you're dealing with one person, then it's a relatively easy exercise in the sense that you're probably aware of their own particular or their own preferred style and approach to influence. And, of course, if you can tailor your message to their style and approach, you're likely to get good results. Equally, we've all had a case where we've tried to influence other people and the glaze has gone in their eyes, they're just not with us, and we try harder and harder and harder to use our particular preferred style and approach, and we wonder why we don't get anywhere. Obviously, what I'm attempting to do here is to give you an array of options as to how you might influence other people. And of course, the third variable in all of this is the context. Different situations require different forms of influence. So, for example, if you've got to make a quick decision in your workplace, then you don't have time to collaborate, which of course is one of the styles or one of the strategies of influence is to collaborate. Collaboration might take too long. Talking to a group of people and trying to get them on board may not be the way to go because, frankly, you've got to make a quick decision. So you just go ahead and make that quick decision. So those three are important. Of course, you can't be sitting there going through a checklist of these three variables when you're influencing somebody. But here's the message. When you are not as effective as you'd like to be, in other words, you can see it's not working, then I suggest to you to move to a plan A or a plan B or even a plan C. And really what this unit is attempting to do is to broaden your influencing capabilities so that you can use a variety of different approaches, which is really important to do. All right, so the profile will come up on your screen. There it is. You can see the profile. Not the profile, I should say my model. The model that I put together, and one of the reasons I put this together, it's a fairly simple model, but one of the reasons I put this together was that when I looked out there and looked for influencing tools, what I found was that on one end of the spectrum we had quite academic type of approaches which really didn't have any practical application. So they were of no use to me. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I found that a lot of the influencing strategies were quite salesy and really weren't applicable to all management contexts. So I kind of thought there was a real opening or an opportunity to develop a new influencing capabilities framework, which is essentially what you're seeing on your screen. Now, let me go through this with you in some detail. And obviously, if you've done the profile, and you would have seen this in your report, and it probably made intuitive sense to you. But you'll notice that you've got, first of all, a push and a pull style. So the push and pull style are quite different. Let me give you some distinctions around what they might be. So the push style is very much a driving, proposing, giving information, taking the idea to the person rather than the other way around. So it's, and when you see your scores on the influencing capabilities profile, you've got some bar graphs there that show you whether you're more predisposed to the push style or more predisposed to the pull style. The pull style, on the other hand, is more of an enabling. It's really working with and through other people, seeking out information and building on that information of other people to a point where you can start to influence them by the form of engagement that you have with the other person. So obviously you can see there the four strategies: investigation, calculation, motivation, and collaboration. So the investigation and motivation strategies are very much part of the push style, whereas the calculation and collaboration styles are very much part of the pull style. So the other variable, of course, on the left-hand side is the approach. So some of us, of course, would prefer to use logic. So logic includes things like fact and having your evidence and having a clear rationale and a structure and having thought through your argument before you present it to somebody, whether it's your boss or the people you lead or your stakeholders or whoever it might be. Now, what's interesting about this is that we will tend to be influenced the way we like to influence other people. So if you're a very logical person and your profile demonstrated that you had a high score or higher score in logical comparative with emotional approach, then it's likely that you will be influenced by facts and logic and structure and measurement more so than the emotional approach, which is the tugging at the heartstrings. And of course, we will use that style when we want to influence people, and we will be influenced by others that will choose to use that particular approach. Now, the emotional style is more around feelings and perceptions and values and so forth. I often find when people complete the influencing capabilities profile, they are quite surprised that they're more in line with the emotional approach than they perhaps thought they would be. Now, neither approach, by the way, is more relevant than the other. Our society is a mix of logic and emotion. For example, the advertising industry uses emotion, but if you've got a brochure on some particular product or service, often what they'll do is give you a little bit of a list of all of the perhaps the facts and so forth about the product. So there'll be a logical approach as well. And then, of course, in the middle, you've got the four influencing strategies that you will also have a bar graph to show you which of those is more relevant than the other in terms of your own profile. But the good news about this is that you can change this significantly. So with a bit of action, with a bit of practice and so on, you can change this. Okay, so let's have a look. So, thank you, John. Thank you for your message. It's a private message, so I won't read it out. Thank you. We'll be in touch. Let's move on to the next slide. So in your influencing capabilities profile, if you've done it, of course, you'd be aware that it'll give you a very interesting page, which really gives you the percentages around where you are, where you have the highest and lowest relative percentages. So you can see in this person's profile, and it is a real person, you can see, of course, that you have this person is predisposed only marginally, I might say, to a push style over a pull style, 63% versus 60%. And then on the left-hand side, they are by far and away more logical than they are emotional in the approach that they use when they influence. So what that means is it's defaulted to the person having a higher score in investigation, so 74% in investigation. Their next most favoured response is the calculation strategy at 65. So this person's profile is showing you that they are what I would call above the line. In other words, they're logical influencers. And probably if I was giving advice to this particular person, I would be saying to them that you should build up your emotional approaches, which include, of course, motivation and collaboration. And later on in the presentation, I'll go through some strategies to do that. The book that I have written has 65 particular tools for all of these 4 influencing strategies. So it's kind of like a toolkit, which is precisely what it's called. So that's a really important part of the profile, just to get a very quick snapshot. The other thing that's important there is you'll notice that there are 4 competencies which underpin the major influencing strategy. So, for example, investigation has gathering evidence, countering arguments, asserting ideas, and generate ideas. So those are the 4 underpinning competencies that make up the investigation strategy. So what I would strongly recommend you do is to look for your relative low scores in your 16 capabilities. So, for example, on the screen there, that you can see that this person has 40% in connect emotionally under motivation, and they have listen actively 43% under collaboration. I would be recommending to them to start to build some strategies into their leadership so that those 2 can be improved, because if they improve those capabilities, it's likely that they're going to be far more influential in the right situation, of course. So that's an interesting chart that you might take note of. So what I want to do now is to go through each of the 4 strategies, talk a little bit about when to use them, and perhaps when not to use them, because that's just as critical. So the Inquisitive Investigator, and of those 4 personalities I showed you before, Al Gore fits the bill perfectly. Al Gore, of course, was the Vice President of the United States, was involved in that very famous presidential election of 2000 when he lost to George W. Bush, and it was because of the controversial decision that was made in the Florida state. It was a close call, and they had to have several recounts. Since he left the White House, he reinvented himself to be a climate change activist, and of course he has a video on YouTube, The Inconvenient Truth, that you may have seen. There's certainly a clip in your profile, and I'd strongly recommend that you have a look at it, because what you'll find is that he's using facts, figures and logic to make his case. There's no shortage of charts, graphs, and statistics to mount his case. Irrespective of whether you agree, disagree, that's not the point. He's out to try and influence people through the investigation strategy. So, what sort of professions are predisposed to investigation? Well, one of the professions that very obviously fits the investigation strategy is police. The police job is to collect evidence and to put it in a systematic and logical way to guide and inform a court case on whether a person's innocent or guilty. So police are very much prone to using investigation professionally. Doesn't mean that all police actually try to influence by investigation, but certainly professionally, that's certainly the bias that you would expect from police doing their work. And of course, scientists and researchers what they do is they develop a hypothesis, and then what they do is they try to prove or disprove that hypothesis through rigorous research. So scientists and researchers can be very influential by the rigor of their investigation into a particular condition or scientific discovery or whatever. So there's a couple of professions that would definitely use investigation. Now, the best time to use this, or when you would use this, of course, is when you've got to investigate workplace incidents, such as safety or harassment. So if there's a safety issue, you would probably you would have to legally go and do some investigation, find out what happened, write a thorough report about it, make some recommendations. It would be the same if somebody had raised an allegation of harassment or bullying. You would have to go and investigate that, and you would have to do that in a thorough and rigorous way. In other words, you'd be using the investigation style. So obviously that's the best place to use it. The worst place to use it is when you've got large-scale initiatives, when people are really, when you want to get people on board. In other words, you want people to have emotional connection to a vision that an organisation or your team has. You would have to use a more emotional approach. So investigation, people may not be interested in the logic at that stage. Now, Margaret Thatcher, of course, was a very strong calculator. Now, calculators are people who like to promote the positives and the negatives of a proposal or situation. So they're the sort of people who you really do know where you stand with them. They like the key performance indicators. They will have a tendency to default back to key performance indicators in the workplace, and they will really let people know where the line in the sand is. If they don't let people know where the line in the sand is, they certainly know where the line in the sand is. So these people are very clear on process and do value process. Other people might argue that they value process too much, but they're very logical still in their approach, and they will talk up pros and cons. So what sort of professions would use this kind of style, I wonder? Well, salespeople are always talking up the benefits of their product or service, and they're certainly making it clear that this is the one last opportunity to purchase. So they tend to use calculation heavily in the sales environment. For example, I can remember walking past Harvey Norman's years ago, and there was a sign on the door that said 50% discount on all laptops, which of course would catch anybody's attention, which is the pros. And of course, when I walked in, there was another sign that said must purchase by the close of business to take advantage of the 50% discount. So it's kind of pushing you into a corner to purchase and to do it quickly, because the deal will never be repeated. And in fact, many people will say that in the sales. Financial advisors do the same thing, and of course animal trainers as well. I remember taking my daughter to the circus, and when we're there, the animals come out, of course, in the circus, and what happens is that the trainer has a whip in one hand and a pocket full of treats in the other, and either gives the animal a light whip or a treat, of course, if they can form. So they definitely use the calculating or calculator strategy. So any workplace change that you're involved in that'll affect employees and their working methods. So, for example, if you're bringing in a new software system or you are implementing some new training, you need to talk up the positives of why people should be doing it, and of course talk about the consequences of not doing it. And if you do that, you will provide people with a clear forum or a clear idea about the pros and cons of a particular course of action. Situations where the direction is vague and unclear, such as, we have a new market that we're moving into or whatever, people want the facts first and foremost in those circumstances. They don't necessarily want to hear what the advantages and disadvantages are as much as the why are we going down this road. So whilst this is still logical, it doesn't always, people in those sort of circumstances want the facts often. All right, so folks, keep the comments and questions coming through as I go through this. I'm covering a lot of content, I might say, in an hour, but hopefully it'll make a lot of sense when you look at your profile or complete your profile. And like always, of course, you will get a recording of this, and you'll also get the slides. So rest assured you'll get all of that information as part of the Lunch and Learn series. Now, we're going below the line now. This is the motivation strategy, and this and the next one, of course, are the emotional approaches. So motivation. So Martin Luther King was a wonderful orator. There's no question about that. If you, as I said, look at the clip on your profile and click on the icon there, you will see him performing in his magnificent speech, I Have a Dream. It was a moving speech. It was very devoid of facts. There was very little in there. It was all beautiful rhetoric, but nevertheless, it had the capacity to move a nation and even a generation of people towards the civil rights causes that he was promoting. So motivators tend to be quite eloquent, and often, I don't want you to think you've got to become a great speaker or an orator like a Martin Luther King in order to be able to motivate. Be a good storyteller. Storytelling is a form of motivation strategy. So you can tell a good story of a situation that occurred. I don't mean a non-fiction story. I'm talking about something that actually happened to make a point, and people will get the point sometimes from the story. So people who like, professions, if you like, that do certainly are motivational in terms of how they go about their work. Entrepreneurs, so Richard Branson clearly is a blue sky thinker who talks in terms of ideas and concepts, and someone like Elon Musk has a great vision, and what he tends to do is to motivate and influence other people with his great vision, and he draws to him people who perhaps want to help him to achieve that vision, whether it's electric cars or landing on Mars or whatever it might be, or populating Mars, I should say. So you've got advertising executives and public relations agents and artistic directors. All of these people only have a split second to influence you and me. So what they do, of course, is they use emotion. And you see that a lot on television with ads. And what the ads are doing is usually got some motivational music in the background and some pictures that you can relate to. And it's about, sparking your heart more than your mind to purchase a particular product or service. So where you would use it is when you're developing a new strategic directions and you need direction, say even for your team, and you need to win the hearts and minds of people towards a particular cause that you're promoting. Now, if you do that, then, you know, using a motivational strategy, that is linking the work that people do to, to the vision is very, very important. So if you had a high score in this, it would make sense to you. You're often talking about the strategic direction of the organisation. You're probably a bit light on facts and not all that interested necessarily, but you're very excited about ideas and the big picture and how you can take people with you. So where it's not very useful to use this is if people actually want to understand the logic behind a decision. So let's say your organisation, business or whatever, decided that there was going to be some significant cost cutting, which entailed people perhaps being made redundant. Well, people don't necessarily want to be motivated at this point, and it's highly unlikely they're going to be anyway. But what they do require in order to move them on, I don't mean move them on out of the organisation, but to move on, is basically to give them a rationale. You know, what is the reason for this? People will ask those questions if they don't get the answers. So using it the wrong place can certainly not work in any way, shape or form. The Collegial Collaborator, Mother Teresa, the final of the four. Mother Teresa was very much involved in stakeholder management. She brought NGOs on board, got governments. I'm sure she twisted a few arms, but she got governments on board. She brought a lot of people into the particular need to service the poor people of Calcutta originally and then other parts of the world. And she, of course, dedicated her life to that. She was so good at it, of course, that she did create enormous change in those areas. So whatever we might think about her, she did some excellent work, undoubtedly, in those poor parts of the world. So she's a good example of somebody who basically, so anybody that's consciously taking people with them, so whether they're stakeholders, whether that's your team, whether it's your boss, whoever it is, they're basically collaborators, as the word indicates. So, collegial collaborator, so what sort of professions would you find people using collaboration regularly? Well, the conductor of an orchestra doesn't play a musical instrument. They are really collaborating to create an ensemble, to create a beautiful sound. So they're basically collaborating with all of the musicians in the orchestra to create a sound. Funeral directors, of course, are dealing with a whole lot of complex stakeholders when they put a funeral together, and they need to collaborate with lots of different people. Choreographers in shows, of course, have a lot of complex stakeholders to work with, and they have to work closely with all of them and build good relationships up with them all. So, wonder what your score was on that. Remember, if your score was very high, well done, but just remember, you can't collaborate on everything, and sometimes it's actually going to be counterproductive for you to do that. So just be aware that your high scores on your profile are also a double-edged sword. They're great in certain circumstances, but of course you may rely on them too much, and that could be problematic for you and other people. So in circumstances where you've got diverse and strongly held views in your team, so it's a good idea to bring those diverse and strong views together and bring them together, because what you're trying to do, of course, is to get people to share that with other people. And by doing that, hopefully you will start to collaborate and get some understanding of what's going on. So people who negotiate enterprise agreements clearly would be, or should be at least, in that whole area of collaboration. Where you wouldn't use it is where people need to understand the facts first. Remember, this is an emotional approach, so people might want to know the logic and the rationale behind a decision, such as introducing a new customer relationship management system into the workplace. So all of these things become quite, they want to know the facts before anything else. Okay, moving right along. You will notice that you can obviously see. Sorry, David, you've got a question there. I'm more than happy to answer that. Let's have a look at your question. Okay. Does the collaborator have to be a motivator? No, David, it's quite possible, actually, that you could have a high score in collaboration and a secondary score in, say, investigation or calculation. Not necessarily. You raise a good point. The difference is that motivators are interested in linking people's activity to a big picture, an idea, a cause, or in the workplace, a strategic direction. All right, the difference between that and collaboration, collaborators tend to build teams. So they are good at working at getting each other to commit to each other. And by doing that, you are creating, you're collaborating, which is good. So the difference is collaborators will tend to put their energy into helping others develop trust and rapport with each other, whereas motivators will tend to draw attention to the big picture. So hopefully that's answered your question, David. So in your profile, of course, you get a page like that, which shows you the different forms of where you sit in relation to all of those things. And of course, you can see there the 16 influencing capabilities are embedded underneath each particular strategy. All right, so let's talk now as we move towards the back end or the final end of the webinar. Here's some tools, some very practical tools for you to consider, which are important to consider if you are trying to build up this particular influencing tool. So, if you want to be more effective as an investigator, what I suggest you do, and of course, as I said in the book, there's a lot more of these, but let me go through 4 things that you can do immediately as of now. And of course, your homework is to build up some of the capabilities that you're not necessarily used to. So using third-party endorsements is very powerful. Have you ever thought about that? So, for example, if somebody in another part of the organisation has done something really effective, in other words, they've walked the talk, why not either ask them to address your team or at least defer to them at different points so that people know that this person's got credibility because they've done it, so there's a logical argument as to why we should do it in our area because obviously it's been done somewhere else. When we interview people for jobs, of course, we use investigation. What we do is we have structured interviews. And what we do is we ask the same questions to different people to elicit responses so that we can make a comparative analysis between a number of candidates for a job. And that's quite effective. And some people would say perhaps not always, but nevertheless, we can justify our selection of a person for a particular job based on the concept of the structured interview. Any surveys that we conduct, one of the reasons they're so popular and perhaps overused, because we're all filling out surveys, I've given you one to do, which is the influencing capabilities profile. But what that basically does is it means that if it's a rigorous survey, we can base decisions on the outcomes of those surveys so that we can start to influence either our boss or other people to do that. The other thing that's quite useful is the process map, and you can see one there on your screen. So it's a good idea to sit down and draw out the process of a particular service or a product that you are actually implementing. And by doing that, you can see where the restraining forces are and where there are pitfalls and problems. Now, the good news is if you can combine two of these strategies, you are going to be even more influential. So, for example, if you sat down with your team and drew out a process of something that they did on a whiteboard or butcher's paper or whatever, and then ask them to get involved in how they could improve the process, then you're using two styles effectively, aren't you? You're using investigation, and you're also using collaboration, because you've got everybody in the room working with you on that. So you can understand why that would be quite effective in the right circumstances. Now, those of you who want to build up your calculation scores and be more, to be able to use this as a strategy, should try three things, I think. Calculation, of course, I was trying to think of a better word for this because calculation doesn't sound great, does it? But you can understand why it's so effective. But look, if you looked at any cost-benefit analysis, that's really based on a calculation strategy. So here are the costs, here are the benefits. If the benefits outweigh the costs, then you have an influential case. Or, of course, if the costs outweigh the benefits, then perhaps the case isn't quite as watertight as we might have thought. So cost-benefit analyses are very, very powerful calculation strategies. Using a force field analysis, which is essentially looking at the driving and restraining forces for a decision. Again, if you did this with your team and drew a line down the centre of the page on a piece of butcher's paper, and you said to your team, what are all the driving forces for this change? And you listed them all down on the left-hand side. And then you said, let's look at the restraining forces, and you listed them all down on the right-hand side, and then you just calculated them up. You may be able to mount a case that there are more driving forces than restraining forces for change. And then you can work with your team on how we might mitigate the restraining forces and how we might maximise the driving forces. And after-action reviews, of course, are done after the event, and these are opportunities where we can actually learn from a project or a segment of work. And I'm disappointed that we don't use this enough in the workplace. It's based on three questions, simple questions. What went well? What didn't go well? And what will we do differently as a result of what we've learned from this particular experience? Again, it can be done with your team, and if you do it with your team, you are combining calculation and collaboration together. So there's three things that you can do if you're trying to build up your calculation capabilities. Let's move on to motivation. Now, probably I've just got a picture there of Steve Jobs. I think it'd be fair to say that his influencing capability was very much around motivation. He was able to link his products with the big picture and simplification and so forth. But what could you do if you've got a low score here? Well, you can use what I call a team values charter, and I've written about this extensively in my book, but essentially it's based on 4 questions. You get your team together and you ask them 4 simple questions, and you have to answer the question yourself. If there was one value that was important in this team working together, what would it be? 2, define what you mean by that value, because of course if someone says respect, it could mean different things to different people. 3, why is it important, which gives you, the leader, an insight into the thinking of the people that you lead and others around the table as well. And 4, what behaviours would demonstrate this value. So this can be very powerful, and you can create a team values charter from those 4 questions. And I found this is surprisingly powerful because people will not argue with their own data. Once they've completed it, they will uphold those values more likely because they believe in them. The GROW model, you can Google GROW, but GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and where to from here. So you can basically ask people what are they trying to achieve, which is the goal, what's the barrier stopping them, which is the reality, what are their options available, in other words, how are they going to solve it. And you'll notice it's plural, so it just gives people, you're expecting as a leader a number of responses and not just one. And what do you need to do next? So you can basically enable people to achieve a great result by using the GROW model, but you need to do a little bit of, investigation, dare I say, into it so that you can understand how it works more effectively. Storytelling's great, as I said before. Tell people a story of, particularly if it's something where you learnt something, where you made a mistake. Then it brings in authenticity and humility into the equation. People often will tend to learn lessons from stories rather than a factual account of what they should and should not do. And of course, why not start your meetings with good news stories? Why not go round the room and just say, win for the week? Let's hear a win for the week, and get your team to come up with one particular uplifting concept or something that happened that went well for the week. And it's pretty sad, isn't it, if people can't come up with one thing that went well for the week. But it creates an upward spiral of positivity, and people, of course, can then focus on some of the problematic material that they're likely to do in a meeting anyway. All right, so folks, any questions, comments, send them through. I'm going at a fairly rapid rate here. I'm covering an enormous amount of material. I'm still keen to stop and answer statements, comments, or questions. Now, if collaboration was your weak point on the profile, then perhaps here's some suggestions about what you might do. Do what the late Stephen Covey suggests in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Start with or begin with the end in mind. So get your team together, say to them, we've got this issue we've got to deal with, we've got an hour. The only outcome I want out of this is that we get a couple of issues on the table, or we come to a solution that we can all accept and agree with, and then you let people go. I mean, obviously you've still got to run the meeting, but you then allow the team to collaborate on what the result might be. Giving people effective feedback is a collaboration strategy. So actually asking people how they thought they went, writing that report or giving that presentation or completing that project or dealing with that difficult customer, and then, of course, collaborating with them on that feedback and what you might do about that to either capitalize on it or perhaps overcome something that went wrong. Paraphrasing and active listening, so basically just giving people back what you've heard, is a collaborative tool. So any conversation skills are pretty much around collaboration, and they work extremely well. All right, so I want you, for your homework, to do this, and I want you to have some fun with this, and I want you to start this today, this afternoon. I'd like you, if you haven't already done so, to complete your profile. Send me an email if you're not sure how that all happens. But I know a fair few of you have done this. So complete your profile. Now, if you have completed your profile, then what I'm going to ask you to do is to start to use some of the tools that I have gone through today. I'd like you to look very carefully at your 16 capabilities. I would like you to put a circle, if you printed it off, around the low ones, and I'd like you to go back and think, what can I do which can help improve my ability to use that capability? All right, because that becomes an opportunity to strengthen your ability to influence other people. Okay, so that's the homework. I hope you guys have all had an opportunity to be doing what we suggested in the first unit, which was around giving feedback. So each of these build on each other. So I don't want you to stop giving feedback. It's very important to do that and to continue to do that. But at the same time, I want you to start building up your capabilities around influencing other people as well. So that's the homework. You can see now where we're at in relation to our Lunch and Learn series. We've completed Unit 1 or Module 1, which is the ingredients of effective feedback. We've completed Module 2. Next time we meet, we will look at how we can get the very best out of our team, and I'll give you some strategies and practical suggestions as to how we might do that. In Module 4, we'll look at getting the best out of people, so we'll look at some of the motivational strategies that actually work, and give you a chance to apply some of those. We've all got one or two people who are very difficult, perhaps, and if you haven't, you're blessed, and congratulations, but most of us do. And we've got to try a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. We've got to do all we can to see if we can actually change that. And unit or module 5 is around understanding people and their personalities. I'll be giving you another diagnostic there. This one won't be electronic. I haven't quite developed that yet. I'm in the process of doing that, but it'll be a paper and pencil one, and I'd ask you to come along to that broadcast with your profile, so it'll help you understand how other people tick. It's based on the principle pretty much of the concept of the platinum rule, not the golden rule. The platinum rule is treat people how they want to be treated. The golden rule, of course, is treat people how you want to be treated. You don't always get great results with that. Module 6, we spend our life in meetings, and you could argue that this is a meeting and you finish this meeting and go off to another meeting undoubtedly. So being a good leader, you should be a good facilitator. You should be able to run good meetings. And I want to give you some very practical tips of being able to be a more effective leader of meetings, because I can assure you, if you can get good at that, it will make a huge difference, and you will stand out from the crowd, because let's face it, most of the meetings we go to are dull and boring and aren't very helpful. So how can we make them efficient? How can we make them more efficient, and how can we make them more effective? So guys, any last questions? Because we've got a few minutes up our sleeve, and I'm quite happy to answer those. So I'll just go back to that last slide. So I'll leave that up while we wait for other people to respond. Here's a question. We have one here. If I'm giving a presentation to a group of people, which of the 4 styles is the best? Well, that's a great question. Actually, and it's an interesting one, because when you've got a group of people in a room, even if it's a team meeting, you have to be more flexible, don't you? Because the possibilities of having people in the room who have different profiles is quite high. So therefore, you should be versatile. What do I mean by that? Well, basically it means that you need to be giving people the facts, the logic, and the rationale. So you need to be using investigation. You basically need to explain to people the advantages of an approach versus the disadvantages of not applying that approach, which of course is the calculation strategy. We also need to try to link our proposal with the strategic direction of the business. So therefore, it has to be very clear why it fits in with or is consistent with the organisational direction. So it has to have a motivational strategy attached to it. And of course, finally, we probably need to keep our meetings as collaborative as possible. So in other words, working with and through other people and engaging them in the conversation so that people will walk out far more committed to themselves and hopefully to the suggestion that you have. So that's probably how I would go about doing that. So thanks, Jamie. That's a good question. Anybody else before we finish up, guys? Because we're just about done. Just give it a moment because people may be typing. No, doesn't look. Oh, here we are. Okay, no, that looks like it's it. Well, that either means I've done a great job explaining it all, or I've done a very poor job and people are confused. Anyway, your homework is clear. Off you go. You need to start influencing people, and this includes your boss, incidentally. So this is managing upwards, downwards, and sideways. And also, if you haven't done your profile, get onto it straight away. And this, of course, will make even more sense to you. So thanks, guys. Look forward to talking with you again on the 11th of August. And please don't forget you need to enroll in that program. Otherwise, you won't be getting reminder emails. So please make sure you do that. You'll be getting an email from me this afternoon with all of those details in them. So thanks, guys, and all the very